run on the same port. There will be a port clash. So what I've done, I've configured Tomcat to use a different port. So if I go to this configuration file here, there is a server.xml. Let me open this up here. All right. Okay. So this is the port. By default, it will be 8080. I've just modified it to 8081. So I've changed the port on which my Tomcat server would run. All right. So that's one chain. Second change, when Jenkins kind of tries to get into my Tomcat and deploy something for someone, he would need some authentications so that he'll be allowed deployment by Tomcat. So for that, I need to create a user on Tomcat and provide this user credentials to my Jenkins instance. So I would go to Tomcat users.xml file here. I've already created a username called deployer and the password is deployer, and I've added a role called manager-script. Manager-script will allow programmatic access to the Tomcat server. So this is the role that is there. So using this credentials, I will enable or I'll empower Jenkins to get into my Tomcat server and deploy my application. All right, only these two things that is required. Let me just start my Tomcat server first. So I get into my bin folder, I open a command prompt here, and there's a startup.bat. It's pretty fast. It just takes a few seconds. Yes, there you go. Tomcat server is up and running. Now this is running on port 8081. So let me just check if that looks good. So localhost 8081. Okay, my Tomcat server is up and running. That sounds good. The user is already configured on this. That's also fine. So what I'll do as a part of my first job, Maven is also installed on my system. So I'm good to use Maven as a part of my Jenkins. So I will put up a simple job now. I will say job, MVN, web app. I'll call this freestyle job. That's good. Okay, so this will be a Git repository. What is the URL of my Git repository? Is this guy, HTTPS URL. Okay, that's this URL. I will use the credentials. The old credentials that I set up will work well because it's the same Git user that I'm kind of connecting into. All right. So now the change happens here where after I get this, since I said this is a simple Maven repository, I will have some Maven targets to run. So the simple target first is, let me run Maven package. This creates a war file. Okay, so MVN package is the target. Package is the target. So whenever I run this package, it kind of creates it, it builds it, it tests it, and then creates a package. So this is all that is required. Maybe let me try to save this and let me first run this and see if it connects well, if there's any problem with my war file or the war file gets created properly. Okay, wonderful. So it built a war file, and if you see, it all shows you what is the location where this war file was generated. So this will be the workspace. If you see this war file was successfully built. Now I need to grab this particular war file and then I would need to deploy it into Tomcat server. Again, I would need a small plugin to do this because I need to connect Tomcat with my Jenkins server. Let me go ahead and install the plugin for the container deployment. So I will go to manage plugins, available, type in container, container, deploy to container. Okay, so this would is the plugin that I would need. I would install it without a restart. Okay, seems to be very fast. Nope, sorry, it's still installing. Okay, it installed the plugin. So if at all you see this, if you go to my workspace, okay, in the target folder, I would see this web application war file that is already built. So I would need to configure this plugin to pull up this war file and deploy it onto the Tomcat server. For deploying onto the Tomcat server, I will use the credentials of the user that I've created. Okay, so let me go to configure this particular project again. And okay, all this is good. So the package is good. I'm going to just create a package. That's all fine. Now add a post build step. So after the war file is built as a part of this package directive, let me use this deployment to container. Now this will show up after you install the plugin. So deploy this one to the container. Now what is that you're supposed to specify? You're supposed to specify what is the location. Okay, so this is a global configuration that is there that will allow you to, from the root folder, it will pick up the war file that is there. So ****star.war, that's good for me. Okay, what is the context path? Context path is nothing but just the name of an application that, under which it will get deployed into the Tomcat server. I will just say mvn web app as the name of my thing. Now I need to specify what kind of a container that I'm talking about. All right, so the deployment would be for this Tomcat 8.5 is what I need. Okay, because the server that we have is a Tomcat 8.5 server that I have. So this would be the URL. So the credentials, yes, I need to add a credential for this particular server. So if you remember, I had created a credential for my web application. So let me just find that. My Tomcat server, yes, configuration of this. Okay, so deployer and deployer. Username is deployer, password is deployer. Okay, so let me use that credential. I would say add a new credential, Jenkins credential. The username is deployer and the password is deployer. So I would use this deployer credentials for that. And what is the URL of my Tomcat instance? So this is the URL of my Tomcat instance. So take the war file that is found in this particular folder, and then context path is mvn web app. Use the deployer deployment credentials and get into this localhost which is there 8081. This is the Tomcat server that is running on my system, and then go ahead and deploy it. Okay, so that is all that is required. So I would say just save this and let me run it now. Okay, it successfully built the war file. It is trying to deploy it, and looks like the deployment went ahead perfectly well. So the context path was mvn web app. So if I type in this, right, if at all I go ahead into my Tomcat server, there would be a web apps folder. You would see the the date timestamp. So this is the file that got recently copied, and this is the Explorer version of our application. So the application was built, the source code of this application was pulled from the GitHub server. It was built locally on the Jenkins instance, and then it was pushed into a Tomcat server which is running on a different port, which is 80881. Now for this demo, I'm running everything locally on my system, but assuming that this particular Tomcat instance was running on some other server with some other different IP address, all that you got to go and change is the URL of the server. So this would be the server in case you already have that, if you have a Tomcat server which is running on some other machine, that's all fine. With a different IP, that's all good enough. The whole bundle or the war file that was built as a part of this Jenkins job gets transferred onto the other server and gets deployed. That's the beauty of Jenkins and automatic deployments, or rather deployments using Jenkins and Maven. Distributed build or master slave configuration in Jenkins. As you would have seen, we just have one instance of Jenkins server up and running all the time. And also I told you that whenever any job that kind of, gets started on the Jenkins server, it is little heavy on in terms of disk space and the CPU utilization. So which kind of, if at all you're in an organization wherein you're heavily reliant on the Jenkins server, you don't want your Jenkins server to go down. So that's wherein you kind of start distributing the load that is there on the Jenkins server. So you primarily have a server, which is just a placeholder or like a master who will take in all the kind of jobs. And what he will do is based upon trigger that has happened to the job or whichever job needs to be built, if at all, he can delegate these jobs onto some other machines or some other slaves. That's a wonderful thing to have. Okay, use case one. Use case two, assuming that, if you have a Jenkins server that is running on a Windows box or on a Linux one, and if at all you have a need where you need to build based upon operating systems, you have multiple build configurations to support. Maybe you need to build a Windows, Windows based .NET kind of a projects where you would need a Windows machine to build this particular project. You also have a requirement where you want to build Linux based systems. You also have a Mac. You support some sort of an apps or something that is built on Mac OS. You would need to build, Mac based system as well. So how are you going to support all these needs? So that's wherein a beautiful concept of master slave, or primary and delegations, or agent and master comes into play. So typically you would have one Jenkins server who will just configure with all the proper authorizations, users, configurations, and everything is set up on this Jenkins server. His job is just delegations. He will listen to some sort of triggers, or based upon the job that is coming in, he will, if there is a nice way of delegating these jobs to somebody else and taking back the results, he can control a lot of other systems. And these systems may not have a complete, or there's no need to put in a complete Jenkins installation. All that you got to do is have a very, very simple runner or a slave, that is a simple jar file that is run as a low priority thread or a process within these systems. So with that, you can have a wonderful distributed build server that can be set up. And in case one of the servers goes down, your master would know that what went down and kind of delegate the task to somebody else. So this is the kind of distributed build or the master slave configuration. So what I'll do in this exercise or in this demo is I will set up a simple slave. But since I don't have too many machines to kind of play around, what I'll do is I will set up a slave in one other folder within my hard drive. So I've got the C drive and D drive. My Jenkins is on my C drive. So what I would do is I would just use my E drive and set up a very, very simple slave out there. I'll just show you how to provision a slave and how to connect to a slave and how to delegate a job to that slave. Let me go back to my Jenkins master and configure him to talk to an agent. So there are various ways in which this client and server talk to each other. What I'm going to choose is something called as JNLP, Java Network Launch Protocol. So using this, I would ensure that the client and server talk to each other. So for that, I need to ensure that I kind of enable this JNLP port. So let me try to find out where is that. Let me try this. Okay, yes. Agents, and by default this JNLP agents thing would be disabled. So if you see here, there's a small help on this. So I'm going to use this JNLP, which is nothing but Java Network Launch Protocol, and I'll configure the master and server to talk to each other using JNLP. So for that, I need to enable this guy. So I enable this guy instead of making the, by default the configuration was disabled. So I make him random. I make him enabled, and I say save this configuration. All right, so now I configured, or I made a setting for the master so that the JNLP port is kind of opened up. So let me go ahead and create an agent. So I'll go to manage nodes. So if you see here, there's only one master here. So let me provision a new node here. So this is the way in which you bring up a new node. You have to configure it on the server. Jenkins would put in some sort of security around this particular agent and let you know how to launch this particular agent so that he can connect to your Jenkins master. So I would say new node. I would give a name for my node. I would say Windows node because both of these are Windows only. So that's fine. I'll just give an identifier saying that Windows node. I would say this is a permanent agent. I would say okay. So if you see the name, let me just copy this name here with the description. Number of executors, since it's a slave node and both of these are running on my system, I'll keep the number of executors as 1. That's fine. Remote root directory. Now this is where, let me just clarify this, since I have both my master is running on my C drive program files 86, or hang on, not 86, C colon program files. It is indeed 86. All right, Jenkins. So this is where my master is running. So I don't want the C drive. What I'll do is I'll use something called as A drive. I have another drive in my system, but please visualize this like, you're running this on a separate system altogether. So I create a folder here called Jenkins node, and this is where I'm going to place I'm going to provision my slave, and I'm going to run him from here. So this is the directory in which I'm going to provision my slave node. So I'm going to copy this here, and that is the remote root directory of your particular agent or slave. So I just copy it here. The label, probably this is fine for me. And usage, how do you want to use this guy? So I don't want him to run all kinds of jobs. I will only build jobs with label expressions that match this particular node. And so this is the label of this node. So in order for somebody to kind of delegate any task to them, they will have to specify this particular label. So imagine this way, if I have a bunch of Windows mesh system, I name it as Windows star. Anything that starts from Windows, I can give a regular expression and say that anything that matches Windows, run this particular task there. If I have some Mac machines, I name all these Mac agents as Mac star or something like that, and I can delegate all tasks, saying that start with whatever starts with Mac in this node, run the Mac jobs there. So you identify a node using the label and then delegate the task there. All right. So launch method, we will use Java Web Start because we're going to use JNLP protocol. Okay, that sounds good. Directory, I think nothing else is required. Availability, yes, we'll keep this agent, yep, online as much as possible. That sounds good. All right, let me save this. All right, I'm just provisioning this particular node now. So if I click on this node, I get a bunch of commands along with an agent.jar. So this is the agent.jar that has to be taken down to the other machine or the slave node, and from there I need to run this along with a small security credential. So let me copy this whole text here in my notepad. Notepad plus plus is good for me. Okay, I copy this whole path there. I also want to download this agent.jar. I would say yes. And this agent.jar is the one that is configured by our server. So all the details that is required for launching this agent.jar is found in this. For launching this agent is found in this agent.jar. So typically I need to take this jar file onto the other system and then kind of run it from there. So I have this agent.jar. I copy this, or rather I cut this. I come back to my folder, my Jenkins node. I paste it here. Okay. So now with this provision agent.jar, and I need to use this whole command, Control A, Control C, and then launch this particular agent. So let me bring up a command prompt right here and then launch it. So I'm saying in the same folder where there is agent.jar, I'm going to launch this particular agent, java-jar, agent.jar, JNLP. This is the URL of my server. In case the server and client are on different locations or different IPs, you have to specify the IP address. All this anyway would show up. And then the secret and the root folder of your Jenkins or the slave node. Okay, so something ran and then it says it's connected very well. It seems to have connected very well. So let me come back to my Jenkins instance and see, if at all you see earlier this was not connected. Now let me refresh this guy. Okay, now these two guys are connected. Provision a Jenkins node, and then I copied all the credentials of the slave.jar along with the launch code and then took it to the other system and kind of ran it from there. Since I don't have another system, I've just got a separate directory in another folder, another drive, and I'm launching the agent from here. As long as this particular agent is up and running or this command prompt is up and running, the agent would be connected. So once I close this, the connection goes down. All right, so successfully we've launched this particular agent. Now, this would be the home directory of this Jenkins node or the Jenkins slave. So any task that I'm going to delegate to this particular slave would all be run here. It will create a workspace right here. All right, so good. So let me just come back and let me kind of put up a new task here. I will say that, delegate job is good. I say freestyle project. I'm going to create a very, very simple job here. I don't want it to connect to Git or anything like that. Let me just create a very, very simple echo delegated to the slave, delegated to, I don't like the word slave, delegated to agent. Put this way. All right. So delegated to agent sounds good. Now, how am I going to ensure that this particular job runs on the agent or on the slave that I've configured? right? Do you see this? If at all you remember how we provisioned our particular slave, we gave a label, right? So now I'm going to put in a job that will only match this particular label. So I'm going to say that whatever matches this, Windows label, run this job on that particular node. So we have only one node that's matching this, Windows node. So this job will be delegated out there. So I save this and let me build this. This is again a very, very simple job. There's nothing in this. I just want to demonstrate how to kind of delegate it to an agent. So if you see this, it ran successfully. And where is the workspace? The workspace is right inside our Jenkins node. It created a new workspace, delegated job, it put in here. So my old or my primary master job is in SQL program files under Jenkins, and this is the slave job that was successfully run. Very, very simple, but very, very powerful concept of master slave configuration or distributed build in Jenkins. Okay, approaching the final section where we've done all this hard work in bringing up our Jenkins server, configuring it, putting up some jobs on it, creating users and all this stuff. Now, we don't want this configuration to kind of go away. We want a very nice way of ensuring that we back up all this configuration. And in case there is any failure, hardware crash or a machine crash, we will want to kind of restore from the existing configuration that we kind of backed up. So one quick way to do that would be, or one dirty way to do that would be just, take a complete backup of our C colon program files colon Jenkins directory, because that's where our whole Jenkins configuration is present. But we don't want to do that. Let's use some plugins for taking up a backup. So let me go to Manage Jenkins and click on Available. And let me search for some backup. There are a bunch of backup plugins. So I would recommend one of these plugins that I specifically use. So this is the backup plugin. So let me go ahead and install this plugin. All right, so we went ahead and installed this plugin. So let me come back to my manage plugins. So this plugin is there. So hang on, backup manager. So you will see this option once you install this plugin. So first time I can do a setup. I would say backup this particular. I'll give a folder. This folder is pertaining to the folder where I want Jenkins to back up some data. And I would say the format should be zip format is good enough. Let me give a name, template file name for my backup. This is good. I want it in verbose mode. I don't want to shut on my Jenkins, or should I shut it down? No. Okay. One thing that you got to remember is that whenever a backup happens, if there are too many jobs that is running on the server, it can kind of Jenkins instance, because it's in the process of copying few of those things, and if the files are being changed at that moment, it's a little bit problematic for Jenkins. So typically you back up your servers only when there is very less load, or typically try to bring it to a shutdown kind of a state and then take a backup. All right, so I'm going to back up all these things. I don't want to exclude anything else. I want the history. I want the Maven artifacts. Possibly I don't want this guy. I would just say save, and then I would say back him up. So this would run a bunch of steps and all the files that is required as a part of this is pretty fast. But then if at all you have too many things up on your server, for now we didn't have too many things up on our server, but in case you had too many things to kind of back up, this may take a while. So let me just pause this recording and get back to you once the backup is complete. So there you go. The backup was successful. Created a backup of all our workspace, the configurations, the users, and all that. So all this is kind of hidden down in this particular zip file. So at any instance, if at all I kind of crash my system for some instance, or say hard disk failure, and I bring up a new instance of Jenkins, I can kind of use the backup plugin for restoring this particular configurations. So how do I do that? I just come back to my manage Jenkins, come back to backup manager, and I would say restore Hudson or Jenkins configuration.
So DevOps today is being implemented by most of the major organizations, whether it's a financial organization, whether it's a kind of a service organization. Every organization is somehow looking forward for the implementation and the adaptation of DevOps, because it totally redefines and automate the whole development process altogether, and whatever the manual efforts you were putting earlier, that is simply or gets automated with the help of these tools here. So this is something which get really implemented because of some of the important feature like a CI/CD pipeline, because CI/CD pipeline is responsible for delivering your source code into the production environment in less duration of time. So CI/CD pipeline is ultimately the goal, which really helps us to deliver more into the production environment when we talk about from this perspective. Now let's talk about that. What exactly is a CI/CD pipeline? Now, when we go into that part, when we go into that understanding, so CI/CD pipeline is basically continuous integration and continuous delivery concept, which is used or which is considered as a backbone of the overall DevOps approach. Now, it's one of the prime approach which we implement when we are going for a DevOps implementation for our project. So if I have to go for a DevOps implementation, the very first and the minimum implementation and the automation which I'm looking forward is actually from the particular CI/CD pipelines here. So CI/CD pipelines is really a wonderful option when we talk about the DevOps here. So what exactly is the pipeline term all about? So pipeline is a series of events that are connected together with each other. It's kind of a sequence of the various steps, like typically when we talk about any kind of deployment, so we have like build process, like we compile the source code, we generate the artifacts, we do the testing, and then we deploy to a specific environment. All these various steps which we used to do it like manually, that is something which we can do it into a pipeline. So pipeline is nothing but a sequence of all these steps interconnected with each other, executed one by one into a particular sequence. Now, the pipelines is responsible for performing a variety of tasks like building up the source code, running the test cases. Probably the deployment can also be added up when we go for the continuous integration and continuous delivery there. So all these steps are being done into a sequence, definitely, because the important when we talk about the pipeline. We need to talk about the same way in which you're working on the development, and in a typical world, the same thing you will be putting up into a specific pipeline. So that's a very important aspect to be considered. Now let's talk about what is the continuous integration here. Now continuous integration is also known as the CI. Pretty much you can see that a lot of tools are actually named as CI, but they are referring to the continuous integration only. So continuous integration is a practice that integrates the source code into a shared repository, and it used to automate the verification of the source code. So it involves the build automations, test cases automation. So it also helps us to detect the issues and the bugs quite easily and quite faster. That's a very early mechanism which we can do as such if we want to resolve all these problems. Now continuous integrations does not eliminate the bugs, but yes, it definitely helps them easily to find out, because we are talking about the automated process, we are talking about the automated test cases. So definitely that is something which can help us to find out the bugs, and then the development can help on that, and they can proceed with those bugs, and they can try to resolve those things one by one. So it's not a kind of automated process which will eventually remove the bugs is something which you have to recode and you have to fix it by following the development practice. But yes, it can really help us to find those bugs quite easy and help them to remove. Now, what is the continuous delivery here? So continuous delivery, also known as CD, is in kind of a phase in which the changes are made into the code before the deployment. Now, in this case, what happens that it's something which we are discussing, or we are validating that what exactly we want to deliver it to the customer. So what exactly we are going ahead or we are moving to the customer. So that's what we typically do in case of continuous delivery. And the ultimate goal of the pipeline is to make the deployments. That's the end result, because coding is not the only thing. You code the programs, you do the development. After that, it's all about the deployments, like how you're going to that to perform the deployment. So that is a very important aspect. You want to go ahead with the deployments, that's it, you can go there. And that's a real beauty about this, because it's in kind of a way in which we can identify that how the deployments can be done or can be executed as such here, right? So the ultimate goal for the pipeline is nothing but to do the deployments and to proceed further on that. right? So when both these practices are placed in together in an order, so all the steps could be referred as a complete automated process, and this process is known as CI/CD. So when we are talking about like when we are working on this automation, so in that case, what happens that we are looking forward that how the automation needs to be done, and since it's in kind of a CI/CD automation which we are talking about, so it's nothing but the end result would be like build and deployment automation. So you will be taking care of both the build and the test cases and the deployment as such when we talk about as such here. The implementation of build and deploy is quite quickly and efficiently, because these are things which is happening automatically, so there is no manual efforts involved and there is no scope of human error also. So we have frequently seen that while doing the deployments we may miss some binaries or some miss can be there, so that is something which is completely removed as such when we talk about this. The process makes the teams more agile, productive, and the confident here, because the automations definitely gives a kind of a boost to the confidence that yes, things are going to work perfectly fine and there is no issues as such present. Now, why exactly Jenkins? Like Jenkins is what we typically understand, or we here and there that it's an CI tool, it's a CD tool. So what exactly is Jenkins all about? So Jenkins is also known as a kind of orchestration or paid or the enterprise tools are there like Cloudbase and all, but there is no app such offering difference between the Cloudbase and the Jenkins here. So Jenkins is a kind of open source tool, which a lot of organizations pretty much implement as it is itself. So even if they don't want to go, we have seen in a lot of big organizations, they are not going for the enterprise tool like Cloud and all, and they are going for the pretty much core Jenkins software as such here. Tool makes it easy to the project, is very can really help the how the things can how it can be performed. So the tools is for the developers to integrate, and which we are getting when we talk about that. So Jenkins is a very important when we talk automation. Jenkins with the help of that is a kind of a or benefit which there are so many plugins as used, and integration with Kubernetes. Cool. Yes, you have of yes and intention we get Jenkins. So there for building is the support straightforward. Definitely go through the Jenkins result with scope of programming, whether it's languages for the Jenkins. CI/CD made the entire development process. A CI/CD pipeline is the ultimate solution which we are looking forward to build such a pipeline. Jenkins is our best solution and best fit which is available here. So there are pretty much 6 steps which is involved when we look forward for any kind of pipeline. It's a generic pipeline which we are looking forward. Now it may have like another steps which is available there, probably some addition installing, but these are the basic steps which is there, like a minimum pipeline if you want to design. These are the steps that we have to require a Java JDK, like a JDK to be available on the system. Now most of the operating systems are already available with a GRE, like a Java GRE, but the problem with GRE is that it's only for the build process. It will not be doing the compilation. You can run the artifacts, you can run the jar files, you can run the application, run the code base, but the compilation requires the Java C or the Java JDK kit to be installed onto the system. And that's the reason why for this one we also require the JDK. And certain Linux commands execution understanding we need to have, because we are going to run some kind of steps, some installation steps and process, so that's pretty much required. Now let's talk about how to CI/CD pipeline with Jenkins. Now first of all you have to download the JDK, and that is something which is installed. So after that you can go for the Jenkins download. Now jenkins.io/download is the website, is the official websites of Jenkins. The best part is that there you have the support for different operating systems and platforms. Say that if you want to go back, Docker, Ubuntu, Fedora, Red Hat, so free Mac operating, whatever the different application you want to do. That's the very first Java file. Download that into a spill. Let's say, create a folder. Now you have to go with the help of CD. There you have to run -jar. Var files can be easily executable. Var files can be easily deployed. So just because with the Java command you can run them, it port just like a Tomcat Apache. So if once the deployment is done, installation is done, so you can just open the localhost, call an ATT. Now if you want to get the Jenkins up and running application, now in there you will be having an option called create new jobs, so you need to click on that. Now once the particular new job, new item, new job, that's a different naming conventions which is available there. Now all you are going to do is that you're going to do like you are proceeding with the creating the pipeline job. So you will be having an option called pipeline job over there. Just select that and provide your custom name, what pipeline name or job name you want to refer, or you want to process there. Now once that is available, so what happens that it will be an easy task for us to see that how exactly we can go ahead and we can perform on that part. So this can really help us to see that how a pipeline job can be created and found modification such. Now when the pipeline give a particular name which is available, you can say okay as a. Now you can find the pipeline there. What happens when you go over there and this is the way that how the pipeline, and find the go with that pipeline option. There are different which is how you want to. Now it access also, like if you want to you can do that. That is like the code management tool also can be used. So like this there are so many of which you can use on that how exactly can be created. So it from this like git server, or you can direct code as such over there. Now so next in JavaScript, so once the particular file particular already that they were there, so you can make do is that once the process be picking up the pipeline and with pipe. Now once process will be able to will be pretty much a kind of a way, so you can click on the console output, you will get all the logs that is happening in the inside that whatever the pipeline steps are getting executed, all of them you will be able to get, or you will be able to get on that part there. So these are the different steps which is involved as such. And the sixth one is that yes, whatever the particular when you run the build, now you will be able to see that source code will be will be checked out and will be downloaded before the build, and you can proceed with that part. Now later on, if you want to change the URL of this GitHub, you can configure the job again, the existing job, and you can change that URL, GitHub link URL, whenever you require. You can also clone this job whenever you go ahead and you work on that, and that's also kind of the best part which is available as such. right? And then you can have the advanced settings over there. So in there you can put like your GitHub repository. You can say like, okay, the GitHub repository is there, so I'm just going to put this URL, and with that, what will happen, that the settings will be available there, and the Jenkins file will be downloaded as such. And when you run the build now, you will be able to have a lot of steps, like a lot of configurations going on. So then the checkout SCM. So we can have a declaration like checkout SCM, which is there. So when the checkout SCM is there, so it will check out a specific source. After that, you go to the log, and you will be able to check every stage which is being built up and as. So now I'm going to talk about the pipeline portal. Now you can, there is you can either create a job type here. Now you have the freestyle pipeline, GitHub organization, multi-branch pipeline. These are the different options which is available there. But I'm going to continue with the pipeline here as such. So when I selected the pipeline and say okay, so what will happen, that I will be able to see a configuration page which is related to the pipeline. Now here the very important part is that you have all the general build trigger options which is similar to the freestyle, but the build step and the post build step is completely removed because of the pipeline introduction. Now here you either have the option to put the pipeline script all together. You can also have some particular example. For example, let's talk about some GitHub Maven particular tool here. So you can see that we have got some steps as such over here, and it's pretty much running over there. Now you run it, it will work smoothly, it will check out some source code. But how we are going to integrate like the Jenkins file into the version control system, because that's the ideal approach we should be following when we create a pipeline of a CI/CD. Now I'm going to select a particular pipeline from SCM here, then go with the Git here. Now in there, the Jenkins file is the name of the file, and I'm going to put my repository. Now this repository of even build pipeline which is available there, it's having some steps related to CI for the build and deployments, and that's what we can follow as such over here. Now in this one, the if it is a private repository, definitely you can add on your credentials, but this is a public repository, a personal repository, so I don't have to put any kind of credentials. But you can always add the credentials with the help of add here, and that can help you to set up whatever the credentials, the private repositories you want to configure. Now once you save the configuration here, now what it's going to do is that it's going to give you a particular page related to build now. If you want to run, if you want to delete the pipeline, if you want to reconfigure the pipeline, all these different options are available there. So we are going to click on the build now here, and when I do that, immediately the pipeline will be downloaded and will be processed. Now you may not be able to get the complete stage view as of now because it's still running. So yeah, you can see that the checkout code is done, then it's going on to the build. Okay, that's one of the steps which is there. Now once the build will be done, so it will continue with the next steps, with the next further steps there. So you can also go to the console output log here. You can click on this, or you can click on the console output to check the complete log which is happening there, or in fact the stage wise logs also. When you go complete logs, it may have a lot of logs will. If you want to specific stage, this comes into the picture. You can see that steps like test cases, the SonarQube analysis, fares, depletion, all this is a part is done here. You get a kind of sexy art to down application. So this is pipeline automations. Now they understand that can be pretty much any such simple pipeline as such with the Jenkins, and pretty much in this one we understood that how exactly the CI/CD pipelines can be configured, and we can use them, and we can get hold on that part.
So there are approximately 7 sections that we cover in DevOps. We go from general DevOps questions, source code management with tools such as Git, continuous integration, and here we'll focus on Jenkins, continuous testing with tools such as Selenium, and then you also have the operations side of DevOps, which is your configuration management with tools such as Chef, Puppet, and Ansible, containerization with Docker, and then continuous monitoring with tools such as Nagios. So let's just get into those general DevOps questions. So one of the questions that you're going to be asked is, how is DevOps different from Agile? And the reality is that DevOps is a cultural way of being able to deliver solutions that's different from Agile. If we look at the evolution of delivery over the last 5 to 10 years, we've gone from waterfall based delivery to Agile delivery, which is on sprints, to where we are with continuous integration and continuous delivery around DevOps. The whole concept of DevOps is culturally very, very different from Agile. And the difference you're looking at to do continuous releases. What does that mean? The difference is that you want to be able to send out code continuously to your production environment. That means the operations team, the development team have to be working together. That means that any code that gets created has to be able to go to production very quickly, which means you need to be testing your code continuously, and then that production environment must also be able to be tested continuously, and any changes or any errors that come up have to be communicated effectively and efficiently back to the dev and op team. Another area in which I see that DevOps is different is really the response that we have for how we engage with the customer. So the customer is coming to your website, to your mobile app, to your chatbot, or any digital solution that you have, and has an expectation. When you're going through and actually doing a DevOps paradigm, the old model would be that you would capture requirements from the customer, then you do your development, then you do your testing, and there would be these barriers between each of those. As we move faster through from waterfall to Agile, what we saw is that with Agile, we were able to respond much faster to customer demands. So instead of it being weeks or months, sometimes in some cases years between releases of software, what we saw was a transition to weeks and months for releases on software. Now we see with DevOps is that the release cycle has shrunk even further with the goal of continuously delighting the customer. How further has that release cycle shrunk to? There are companies that have gone from having releases of once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month to now multiple releases a day. And some companies have up to 50 a day. And something to also bear in mind is that each of those, there's the planning and coding phase, and then there's the deploying phase. And you have a tool such as Jenkins that allows you to integrate between both environments. Some of the core benefits that you may have to DevOps are going to be some technical benefits and some business benefits. So when somebody asks you what are the benefits of DevOps, you can reply that from a technical point of view, you're able to use continuous software delivery to constantly push out code that has been tested and verified against scripts that have been written and approved. You can be able to push out smaller chunks of code so that when you have an issue, you're not having to go through massive blocks of code or massive projects. You're going through just very small microservices or small sections of code, and you're able to detect problems faster. On the business benefits are absolutely fantastic. From a customer that's website or to you're going to see it responding continue always aware that listening and responding are able to front of the nervous system. You are sitting with a business leader and they're giving you ideas of what they would like to see from feedback that they've had from their customers. This is blue sky opportunity. This is thinking of big ideas. That second stage, and this often comes as a fast follow to stage one, is actually proving out that concept. So developing a proof of concept. And a proof of concept can actually be multiple different things. So it could be something as simple as a wireframe, or it could be something that is as complex as a mini version of the final application. Depending on the scope of the work that you're delivering will really depend on how complicated you want the POC to be. But with that in mind, whatever choice you make, you have to be able to deliver enough in the POC so that when you present this to a customer, they're able to respect creation that you've developed, to give you feedback, validate that you are able to provide the right product that's being delivered. So that once you actually start delivering out code that customers can interact with, you want to be able to see what are the pieces of the solution that they are using, what do they like, what is complicated, where are the failure points, and you want to use that data and feed that back into your continuous integration and have that as a means to be able to backfill the demand of work that gets completed in the backlog. So what is the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment? So continuous delivery is based on putting out code that can be deployed safely to production. It ensures that your businesses and functions are running as you would expect them to be. So it's going through and completing code that you would actually see. Continuous deployment, in contrast, ensuring automating the deployment. So you're able to and scale up your meet the demand, the solution, and the development are much and more robust. So if we look, continue and commitment come hand in the initial and you're comfortable with pushed your production environment. One of the things that's great about working with the tools that you use in a DevOps continuous integration and continuous delivery model is that the development tools that you use, the containerization tools, the testing tools, should always reflect the production environment. And what this means is that when you actually come to deploying solutions to production, there are no surprises because your development team have been working against that exact same environment all the way through. So a question that you'll also be asked is, what is the role of the configuration management in DevOps? And so the role of configuration management really has three distinct areas. The first, and this is really the obvious one, and this is the one where you probably already have significant experiences, is the ability to manage and handle large changes to multiple systems in seconds rather than days, hours, or weeks, as may have happened before. The second area is that you want to also demonstrate the business reasons for having configuration management. And the business reason here is that it allows IT and infrastructure to standardize on resource configurations. And this has a benefit in that you're able to do more with fewer people. So instead of having large team, you can actually have a smaller adjustment and like scale. So if you have configuration management tools, you're able to manage a significant number of servers and domains that may have entire architecture of the system. So when this question comes up, you want to dig in and show your knowledge on how configuration and continuous monitoring is able to control an entire environment. So the number one topic that you want to bring up when it comes to continuous monitoring is that with being able to effectively monitor your entire network 24/7 for any changes as they happen, you're able to identify and report those faults or threats immediately and respond immediately for your entire network instead of having to wait, as it happens sometimes, for a customer to email or call you and say, hey, your website's down. Nobody wants that. That's an embarrassing thing. The other three areas that you want to be able to highlight are the ability to be able to ensure that the right software and the right services are running on the right resources. That's your number one tip to give of continuous monitoring, is to be able to monitor the status of this is not requiring but having a continuously. Is that by scripting your entire creating a audit to take predictions are provided cloud for AWS, and they have really 5 distinct areas that you can zero in on for services. So when the question comes up, what is the role of AWS in DevOps? You want to really hold out your hand and list off 5 areas of focus using your thumb and finger. So you want to have flexible services, built for scale, automation, secure, and a large partner ecosystem. And having those 5 areas will really be able to help demonstrate why you believe that AWS and other cloud providers, but AWS is certainly the leader in this space, are great for being able to provide support for the role of DevOps. So one of the things that we want to be able to do effectively when we're releasing any kind of solution is to be able to measure that solution. And so KPIs are very important. So you will be asked for 3 important DevOps KPIs. And so 3 that really come to mind that are very effective. The first one is mean time to failure recovery. And what this talks about is what is the average time does it take to recover from a failure? And if you have experience doing this, then look at the experience you have and use a specific example to demonstrate that phrase. The second is frequency. And with deployment frequency, do you actually solutions to impact to and deployment frequency, which is around what is the percentage of failed deployments. So how many times did you deploy to a server and something happened where the server itself failed? What we're looking for when you're going through and being asked for these KPIs is experience with actually doing a DevOps deployment and being able to understand what DevOps looks like when you're pushing out your infrastructure. And then the second is being able to validate that self-auditing ability. And one word of caution is don't go in there and say that you have 100% success. The reality is that servers do degrade over time. And you maybe want to talk about a time when a server did degrade in your environment and use that as a story for how you were able to successfully get over and solve that degradation. So one of the terms that is very popular at the moment is infrastructure as code. And so you're going to be asked to explain infrastructure as code. And really, it's something that actually becomes a byproduct of the work you have to do when you're actually putting together your DevOps environment. And infrastructure as code really refers to the writing of code to actually manage your environment. And you can go through many of the other tools that we've covered in this series, but you'll see that Ruby or YAML as languages to describe the configuration for it. This allows you to structure it by which is software directly onto the machine. This is really important when it comes to cloud computing. There really is a strong emphasis of being able to explain infrastructure as a service, and infrastructure as code is fundamental to the foundation to infrastructure as service. And then finally, it allows you to be able to talk about how you can use scripted languages such as YAML to be able to create a consistent experience for your entire network. All right, so let's now get into the next section, which is source code management. And we're going to focus specifically on Git. The reason being is that Git is really the most popular source code management solution right now. There are other technologies out there, but for the types of distributed environments that we have, source code management with Git is probably the most effective. So the first question you'll be asked when it comes to Git is to talk about the difference between centralized and distributed version control, and look at the way that the two are set up. Older technologies, versions of Team that currently have Git in it, but server for check out, building out your solution, you actually check out all of the code for the solution directly onto your local development machine. So you can actually have a copy of the entire solution running on your local machine. This allows you to be offline. It really allows for scalability when it comes to building out your team. So if you have a team that may be in Europe, you can actually then scale that team with people from Asia, from North America or South America very easily, and not have to worry about whether or not they have the right code or the wrong code. And in addition to that, if the actual main server where you're checking in your code does crash, it's not a big deal, because you actually have, each person has a copy of the code. So as soon as the server comes back up, you're able to check back in and everybody's running back as if there was nothing had happened at all. So one of the questions you'll be asked is to give the answer to some of the commands you use for working with Git. So if you were to be asked a question is, what is the Git command that downloads any repository from GitHub to your computer? On the screen we have four options. We have Git push, Git fork, Git clone, and Git commit. The answer in this instance would be Git clone. Now, if you want to be able to push code from your local system to GitHub repository, then first of all, you want to be able to do it to a repository. You may want to talk about using the command add origin and then the actual pub repository. You want to actually at this point other repository lab that you have it Git repository used just for the development. So you've added a repository, and the second one to use is a push to a local file, the master you use push origin. So one question is the repository way of initial repository. So what is the way it allows you to create a unit, and then that creates all relay doing. And using the commands for stash and checked out source stored in the root init. Would you be git m dash? What would be commit? What is the process to revert a commit that has already been pushed and made public? And there are two ways you can address this. And then commit ID could be something such as 56DE0938F, but you'd have to find that from the commit that you had made, but that would allow you to revert any bad files that you had submitted. So there are two ways of being able to get files from a Git repository, and you're going to be asked to explain the difference between git fetch and git pull. So git fetch allows you to fetch and download only new data from a new repository. It does not integrate any of the new data into your working files, and it can be undone at any time if you wanted to break out the remote tracking branches. In contrast, git pull updates the current head branch with the latest changes from the remote server. So you get all of the files downloaded. It downloads new data and integrates it with the current working files you have on your, and it tries to merge remote to local one. Questions you'll get is what. So as a developer, convolution. But what happens here where a different amount of YouTube, but you up to the main. So what you can actually do is branch that to start work of the main, and this dash to modify out into line branch. Once you bound answer change, actually what it allows you to has the team out that features parallel branch, and then at some point be reintroduced to the mainline branch to allow the team to add in new features. And so if we look through the merge and git rebase, these are the two features that you'd be using continuously to be able to talk about how you take a branch and merge it back into the mainline branch. So on the left hand side we have git merge, which allows you to take the code that you're creating and merge it back into the master. On the right hand side what you have is a slightly different approach. This is for projects where you reach a point in a project where you go, okay, we're going to effectively restart the project at this point in time, and we want to ignore the complete history that's happened before that, and that's called git rebase, and that would allow you to rewrite the project history by creating a brand new mainline branch that ignores all other previous branches that have happened before it. You can, if you want to, very quickly and easily find out all the files that have been used to make a particular commit. So when somebody asks you the question, how do you find a list of files has been changed in a particular commit, you can actually say that all you have to go is find git tree dash r and then the hash that you use for the commit. Actually then give you a breakdown of all the files that have been with that particular commit. A question that you'll be asked when you're talking about files is, what is a git and how? Essentially, you have two more with commits. You have to be determined which is files that need, and this is where you do actually help this issue, the conflicted, like the changes in the final. So let me use it talking about under name you will be demonstrating the beings of conflict markers, and you'll be able to select which conflicts you want to keep and which you want to merge and which ones you want to change. So it's a step through how you would actually resolve a merge conflict. The first step would be under GitHub. You want to be able to pull the repository name and then the pull request request around that repository. In the pull request list, click the pull request with a merge conflict and that you'd like to be able to resolve. And that will pull up a file that will list out all of the conflicts for you. Near the bottom of that file will be a list of the requests that need to be resolved. And then if you need to make a decision on which branches you want to keep or which ones you want to change, that will have to be something you have to put in instructions inside of the file. You'll actually see that there are conflict markers within the instructions which are going to ask you which files you want to change and which ones you want to keep. If you have more than one merge conflict in your file, scroll down to the next set of conflict markers and repeat steps 4 and 5 until you resolve all of the conflicts. You will want to mark your file as resolved in GitHub so that the repository knows that you are having everything resolved. If you have more than one file with a conflict, then you want to go then onto the next file and start working on those files and just keep repeating the steps we've done up to this point until you have all of the conflicts resolved. And then once you have all of the resolutions created, then you want to select the button which is commit merge and then merge all your files back into GitHub, and this will take care and manage the resolution of the merge conflict within GitHub. So you can also do this through command line, and with the command line you want to use git bash, and so you want to, as a first step, open up git bash and then navigate to the local git repository in command line using the cd change directory and then list out the actual folder where you actually are putting all of your code. And then you want to be able to generate a list of the files that are affected with the merge conflict. And in this instance here, you can actually see the file styleguide.md has a merge conflict in it. And as before, with working with GitHub, you actually go through and use a text editor, and you can use any text editor. But as you go through and edit out what you want to keep and what you want to manage in your conflict, so you actually have a resolution that's being created, so that you'll be able to then, once you're using the conflict markers, you can actually merge your files together. The solution itself will allow you to integrate effectively the resolution. Gone through your changes, you're able to select commits into a single commit and able to push that up to your remote repository. All right, let's talk about the next section, which is continuous integration with Jenkins. So the first question you'll be asked about with Jenkins is explain a master-slave architecture of Jenkins. So the way that Jenkins is set up is that the Jenkins master will pull code from your remote Git repository such as GitHub and will check that repository every time there is a code commit. It will distribute the workload of that code and the tests that need to be applied to that code to all of the Jenkins slaves. And then on request, the Jenkins master and the slaves will then carry out all the builds and tests to be able to produce test reports. The next question you'll be asked is, what is a Jenkins file? And simply put, a Jenkins file is a text file that has a definition of the Jenkins pipeline and is checked into a repository. This really allows for three disciplines. One, it allows for a code of the pipeline. It permits an order and a single pipeline and editing. The following Jenkins from the, is it java-jar-war jenkins.war? And the answer is A, java-jar jenkins.war. So when working with Jenkins, you're going to be asked, what are the key concepts and aspects of working pipeline, node, step, and stage? So pipeline refers to the user-defined model of a CD continuous delivery pipeline. Node are the machines which are part of that Jenkins environment within the pipeline. Step is a single task that tells Jenkins what to do at that particular point in time. And then finally, stage defines a conceptually distinct subset of tasks performed through the entire pipeline. And tasks could be build, test, and deploy. So which of the following file is used to define dependency in Maven? And do we have A, build.xml, B, pom.xml, C, dependency.xml, or D, version.xml? And the answer is pom.xml. Working with Jenkins, you're going to be asked to explain the two types of pipeline used in Jenkins along with the syntax. And so a scripted pipeline is based on GroovyScript as their domain specific language for Jenkins. And there are one or more node blocks that are used on the pipeline. On the side, you can see the actual script, and the right-hand side want the actual ratio section of that. The second pipe, declarative pipe. Declarative pipe, a syntax pipeline should look, and you can actually break blocks or use to define completed pipe. You create a copy of Jenkins. Well, to create a backup directory, create a copy of them. Well, there are three ways you can manage the corresponding directory by renaming a directory. So security is fundamental to all the work that we do within DevOps, and Jenkins provides the center core to all the work that gets completed within a DevOps environment. There are three ways in which you can apply security to authenticate users effectively. And when you are asked about this question of security within Jenkins, the three responses you want to be able to provide is A, Jenkins has its own internal database that uses secured user data and user credentials. B is you can use a LDAP or lightweight directory access protocol server to be able to authenticate Jenkins users. Or C, you can actually configure Jenkins to authenticate by using such as OAuth, which is a more modern method of being able to authenticate users. You're going to be asked how to deploy a custom build of a core plugin within Jenkins. Essentially, the first you want to go first the .hpi plugin for Jenkins a plugins directory. If you want to create an empty HPI once you've completed these Jenkins, don't build Jenkins out very often, but when it does, it's good to know how you can actually get into Jenkins and be able to resolve the problems of authenticating effectively into the system as an administrator. So when you want to be able to get into a Jenkins environment, what you want to be able to do is locate the config file. You should see that it's set to true, which allows for security to be enabled. If you then change the user security setting to false, security will be disabled, allowing you to make your administrative changes and will not be re-enabled until the next time Jenkins is restarted. So what are the ways in which a build can be scheduled and run in Jenkins? Well, there are four ways in which you can identify the way a build can be scheduled or run in Jenkins. The first is when source code management commits new code into the repository. You can run Jenkins at that point. The second can be after the completion of other builds. So maybe you have multiple builds in your project that are dependent to each other, and when so many other builds have been executed, then you can have Jenkins run. You can schedule builds to run at a specified time. So you may have nightly builds of your code that illustrate the changes in the solution you're building. And then finally, you also can manually build a environment on request. Occasionally, you will want to also restart Jenkins. And so it's good that when a question around how do you restart Jenkins manually comes up, that you have the answers. And there are two ways in which you can do it. One is you can force a restart without waiting for builds to complete by using the Jenkins URL that you have for your environment /restart, or you can allow all running before restart are required. Use the command of URL for your Jenkins environment /safe restart. So let's go into the fourth and final section of this first video, which talks about continuous testing with Selenium. So the first question you will be asked most likely around Selenium are, what are the 4 different Selenium components? And again, you will want to hold open your fingers because there are 4 distinct environments. You have Selenium Integrated Development Environment, or Selenium IDE. You have Selenium Remote Control, or Selenium RC. You have Selenium WebDriver, and then Selenium Grid. You'll be asked to explain each of those areas in more detail, but let's start off by looking at Selenium Driver. What are the different exceptions in Selenium WebDriver? So it's useful to remember that an exception is an event that occurs during the execution of a program that disrupts the normal flow of that program's instructions. And so we have 4. We have a timeout exception, an element not visible exception, no exception, and each step through them are the 4 different types of exceptions that can be thrown up when using the Selenium WebDriver. So as we evolve in our digital world with the different types of products that are available for us to be able to build solutions onto multiple platforms, you're going to be asked, can Selenium and other DevOps tools run in other environments? And so a good question around this is, can Selenium test an application in an Android web browser? And the short answer is absolutely yes, it can. But you have to use the Android driver for it to be able to work. So you want to be able to talk about the 3 different types of supported test within Selenium. So when the question comes up, what are the different test types supported by Selenium, you can answer it. And there are 3 different types of test. First is a functional test, second is a regression test, and third is a testing test. The functional test is a kind of black box testing in which test cases are a specific feature within the software. There's areas that the code, when below testing test, allows you to monitor the response of a solution as you increase the volume of hits in how you're using the code are put onto it. An additional question you'll be asked is, how can you get a text of a web element using Selenium? Well, the get command is used to retrieve text of a specific web element. It's important to remember, however, that the command does not return any parameters, but just returns a string value. So you want to be able to capture that string value and discuss about it. A question you'll be asked around Selenium is, can you handle keyboard and mouse actions using Selenium? And the answer is yes, you can, but you have to make sure that you're using the Advanced User Interaction API. And the Advanced User Interaction API is something that can be scripted into your tests, and it allows you for capturing methods such as a click and hold and drag and drop mouse events, and then keyboard down or keyboard up key release events, so that if you want to capture, say, the use of Control Shift or a specific function button off the keyboard, you'd be able to capture those. Of the following 4 elements, which of these elements is not a element method? A, get text, B, size, C, get tag name, D, send keys. And it's B, size. You're going to be asked to explain what is the difference for when we use find element or find elements. And so if we look at find element finds the first element in the current web page that matches the specified locator value. In contrast, find element finds all of the elements on the web page that matches the specified value. When using WebDriver, what are the driver close and driver quit commands? And these are 2 different methods used to close a web browser session in Selenium. So driver close will close the current web browser on which your focus is set, and driver quit closes all the browser windows and ends the WebDriver completely. The final question that you are likely to be asked in using Selenium is, how can you submit a form using Selenium? Since that's relatively easy. In the following lines of code, you submit an element, driver, and then the C's first section, which is configuration management. So one of the questions that you'll get asked right away is, why do you have SSL certificates used for Chef? Really fundamentally, your immediate answer should be security. SSL provides for a very high level of private security and private and public key pairing. This really is essential to ensure that you have a secure environment throughout your entire network. The second part should be that if you're using SSL and you're using the private public key model within SSL, you're able to guarantee the systems on your network that the Chef, that you'll be able to validate that the nodes within your network that Chef is validating against actually are the real nodes themselves, not imposters. So you will also be asked some questions such as the following. Which of the following commands would you use to stop or disable the HTTP service when the system boots? And you'll typically get 4 responses, and there'll be hashtag systemctl disable HTTPD dot service, or is it system disable HTTP dot service, system disable HTTPD, disable HTTP dot service. Should be the first one, which is hashtag CTL effectively out is what is that your commands that you would use are, for instance, if you want to create an instance of test kitchen, you would do kitchen create. If you want to destroy an instance after you created it, you do kitchen destroy. And if you want to be able to combine multiple instances, you would do kitchen converge. So a question you'll get is around Chef is, how does Chef Apply differ from Chef Client? So fundamentally, the difference between them is that Chef Apply will validate the recipe that you're working on, whereas Chef Client looks to apply and validate the entire cookbook that's run in your server environment. So one is focused on the recipe and the other is focused on the entire cookbook. So there are some differences when you're working with different command lines. So for instance, when you're working with Puppet and you're working with one version of Puppet and you want to do, what is the command to sign a requested certificate? The top example here is for Puppet version 2.7, whereas the lower option here is for passion. And that's something to, when you're going through your interview process, tools used within integration through Devops vary. And so you have the different way to show the deep knowledge that you have. Which open source or community tools do you use to make Puppet more powerful? And essentially this is asking you to look beyond the core foundation of Puppet itself. And so the 3 options you have is being able to track configurations with Jira, which you should be doing anyway, but it's a great way to be able to clearly communicate the work that's being done with Puppet. Version control can be extended with Git. And then the changes should be passed through Jenkins. So the 3 tools you want to be looking at: integration with Jira, Git, and Jenkins. So what are the resources in Puppet? Well, fundamentally, resources are a basic unit of any configuration management tool. They are the features of they are the catalog and execution code. Dig deeper into Puppet. Another thing likely to be asked in Puppet is really in your manifest that contain the various configurations. And this can include services, files, and packages. And we have on the screen here an example of what a class would look like when you write it out. And you may want to memorize just one class. Don't memorize just a whole set of classes. Just memorize one. The person that's interviewing you is just really looking for someone who has a working knowledge. They're not looking for you to have memorized complete massive classes, but having one small class to be able to illustrate the experience you have is extremely valuable to the interviewer, particularly if it's a technical interview. So as we move into Ansible, one of the things that you're going to be asked around Ansible is what is Ansible role? So a role is an independent block of tasks and variable files and templates embedded inside of the playbook. So the example we have here on the screen actually shows you one role within a playbook. And in this role, it is to install Tomcat on a node. As with question within Puppet of a class, it's probably good to just one or two roles so you're about and you're having your view. Working with Ansible, should you be curly brackets? Two different ways kind of refer to or curly brackets. Either way, answer is when would you use these? Answer is when would you use these specific types of brackets within Ansible? And really, the answer comes down to two things. One is that it makes it easier to distinguish strings and undefined variables. And the second is for putting together conditional statements when you are actually using variables. And the example we have here is this prints the value of, and we have foo, and we have to then put in the variable conditional statement of foo is defined as something. So what is the best way to make content reusable and redistributable with Ansible? And there's really essentially three. The first is to include a submodule or another file in your playbook. The second is to import an improvement of an include, which ensures that a file is added only once. And then the third is roles to manage the tasks within the playbook. So a question you will be asked is provide a differences between Ansible and Puppets. So if we look at Ansible, it's a very easy agentless installation. It's based on Python. You can configure it with YAML, and there are no support for Windows. In contrast, Puppet is an agent-based installation. It's written in Ruby. The configuration files in DSL and support on operating systems. Deeper into architecture and more simple architecture, only architecture. It's a more sophisticated environment architecture. Is contained and the environment. So don't search in a command line. And then the Docker daemon, which is run as a REST API within the command line, will accept the request and service to host and distribute Docker images among other users. So you'll also be asked to provide what are the advantages of Docker over virtual machine. And this is something that comes up very consistently. In fact, you may want to even extend it as having what are the differences between having a dedicated machine, a virtual machine, and a Docker or Docker-like environment. And really, the arguments for Docker are just absolutely fantastic. First of all, Docker containers occupy significantly less space than a virtual machine or a dedicated machine. The boot up time on Docker is significantly faster than a VM. Containers have a much better performance as they are hosted in a single Docker image. Docker is highly efficient and very easy to scale. Particularly when you start working with Kubernetes, easily portable across multiple platforms, and the space allocation Docker data shared and reused. The argument is significant. Order of emphasis is still located, and having cloud or climate Docker are going to be very persuasive. Be very what the advantage of the team, because you'll be able to with your team, but also going will work with that. How do we share Docker containers with different nodes? And in this instance, what you want to be able to do is leverage the power of Docker Swarm. So Docker Swarm is a tool which allows the IT administrators and developers to create and manage clusters of swarm nodes, commands to create a Docker Swarm. And so here we have an example of what a manager node would look like. And once you've created a swarm on your manager node, you can now add worker nodes to that swarm. And again, when you're stepping through this process, be very precise in the execution path that needs to be taken to be able to effectively create a swarm. So start with the manager node, and then you create a worker node. And then finally, when a node is initialized as a manager node, it can immediately create a token, and that token is used for the worker nodes and associating the IP address with the worker nodes. Multiple containers using a single service. It is possible to run multiple containers as a single service by using Docker Compose. And Docker Compose will actually run each of the services in isolation so that they can interact with each other. The language used to write out the compose files that allow you to run the service is called YAML, and YAML stands for yet another markup language. So what is the use of a Docker file? So Docker file is used for creating Docker images using the build command. So let's go through and show on the screen what that would be an opportunity. If you're actually a technical interview, you could potentially even ask, can I draw on or show you what the architecture would look like and what the process. When you're going through an interview, someone who, one of the things that I really an interview candidate, and in this instance, stand up and actually show creating image quickly, little square. You can actually show the, as in architect, Docker Hub, everybody else, Docker role, image, so it can Docker stores or a Docker, the only collection of and the and read, write, replace. You can or so to build Docker, but you could so it's something you will reference a JSON able to do value paired matching using a JavaScript like. So you're going to be asked to how to create a Docker container. So let's go through what that would look, and we'll break it down task by task. So the task is going to be create a MySQL Docker container. So to do that, you want to be able to build a Docker image or pull from an existing Docker image from a Docker repository or hub. And then you want to be able to then use Docker to create a new container, which has MySQL from the existing Docker image. Simultaneously, the layer of read-write file system is also created on top of that image. And below at the bottom of the screen, we have what the command lines look for that. So what is the difference between a registry and a repository? So let's go through that. So for the Docker registry and repository, for the registry, we have Docker registry is an open source server-side service used for hosting and distributing Docker images, whereas in contrast, for repository, it's a collection of multiple versions of a Docker image. In a registry, a user can distinguish between Docker images with their tag names. And then finally, on the registry, Docker also has its own default registry called Docker Hub. For the repository, it is a collection of multiple versions of Docker images. It is stored in a Docker registry. and it has two tabs: a public and private registry. So you can actually create your own enterprise registry. So you're going to be asked, the cloud platforms that support Docker, really, list them all. And we have here Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Rex. You could add in there, could really any of service providers out there do support domain industry standard. Purpose of English command. So instruction used in English is used in command. It is used within a Docker network, whereas it can be a Docker environment. Suppose it is instruction of building an image and running it. It is used host ports to suppose there's for command -p doing our command. An example are XPD or example -080 as continuing. So how does Nagios help in continuous monitoring of systems, applications, and servers? And so this is really just a high-level question of using Nagios within your environment. And you should be able to just come back very quickly and say, Nagios allows you to help manage the servers and check if they're being sufficiently utilized and if there are any task failures that need to be addressed. And so there are 3 areas of utilization and risk that you want to be able to manage. This is being able to verify the status and services of the entire network, the health of your infrastructure as a whole, and if applications are working properly together with web services and APIs that are reachable. So the second question you'll be asked is, how does Nagios help in continuous monitoring of systems, applications, and services? So it's able to do this by having the initial Nagios process and scheduler and the additional plugins that you would use for your network connect with the remote resources and the Nagios web interface to be able to run status checks on a predefined schedule. So what do you mean by Nagios Remote Plugin Executor, or the NPRE of Nagios? So NPRE allows you to execute plugins on Linux machine, allowing to additional monitoring and machine disk usage, CPU load, etc. What are the ports used by Nagios for monitoring purposes? In this example, there are 3, and they're easy to remember. So they're essentially ports 56566, 5668. So there are 2 types of checks in Nagios. You will be asked for what is an active and passive in Nagios. So an active is initiated, run on a regular schedule. A passive check is initiated and formed by an external application or process. So this may be where a system is failing. And results are submitted to Nagios for processing. And to continue with this, for what is an active and passive check, active checks are initiated by the check logic within the Nagios daemon. Nagios will execute a plugin and pass information about what needs to be checked. Plugin will then check the operational state of the host or service and then process the results of the host or service check and send out notifications. In contrast with the passive check, it is an external application that initiates the check. It writes the results of the check to an external command line file. Nagios reads the external command file and places the results of all passive checks in a queue for later processing, so you can go back and revalidate. And then Nagios may send out notifications, log alerts, etc., depending on the results that they get from checking the information. So you're going to be asked to explain the main configuration file and its location in Nagios. So the main configuration file consists of a number of directives that affect how Nagios operates. So consider this as the configuration file that is read by both Nagios processor and the CGIs. So this will allow you to be able to manage the main configuration file that's placed into your settings directory. So what is the Nagios Network Analyzer? And again, hold out your 4 fingers because there are 4 options here. So the Nagios Network Analyzer are 1, provides an in-depth look at all your networks and security threats. 2, allows together high-level information on the health of your network. 3, provides a central of your network traffic and bandwidth data, and then 4 allows you to proactive in resolving outages, abnormal behavior, and so what are the P and SSL certificate monitorings with Nagios? So with HTTP monitoring, it allows you to have increased server and services and application availability, very important, section of network outages and protocol failures, and transaction monitoring. The SSL certificate monitoring allows you for increased website availability, frequent application availability, and provides increased security. So explain virtualization with Nagios. So in response to this, the first thing you should be able to talk about is how Nagios itself can run on many different virtualization platforms, including Microsoft Visual PC, VMware, Xen, Amazon EC2, etc., etc. So just make sure you get that right off the bat. Nagios was able to provide capabilities to monitor an assortment of metrics on different platforms. It allows for quick detection of service and application failures, and has the ability to be able to monitor against many metrics, including CPU usage, memory, networking, and VM status. So name the 3 variables that affect recursion inheritance in Nagios, and it is name, use, and register. So name is a template name that can be referenced in other object definitions. Use specifies the name of the template object that you want to inherit its properties and variables from. And register indicates whether or not the object definition should be registered to Nagios. And on the right hand side of the screen, we have an example of what that script would look like. Again, you may want to be able to memorize this, as it's something that you can actually write down and show someone if you're going through a technical interview. So why is Nagios said to be object oriented? And fundamentally it comes down to the object configuration format that you can definitions to inherit properties from other objects, and this is typical of object oriented development and for the Nagios environment. So some of the objects that you can inherit are services, hosts. So finally, explain what is state in Nagios. And so there are really 4 options here when you're talking about state stalking. So state stalking is used for logging purposes in Nagios. It allows you to enable for a particular host or service that Nagios will watch over very carefully. It will log any changes it sees in the output of the check results, and then finally helps the analysis of log files.
And so with this, we have reached the end of our DevOps full course. We hope that you guys found it informative and helpful. Do like and share it. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more from Simply Learn.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simply Learn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.